And there are no settlers left that remember my dad, but they said he was a very hard worker, very good man, would help anybody he could. I remember the year before he died, we had somebody, it was during Depression, and in those days there was a train going by, and the boxcars were filled with men. They had no place to go, they had no job, they had no home. I think my mother fed somebody every day. And one man came in the fall and he had no place to go. You know, I can't remember what province he came from, but he was a Swede.
Oh, he was a Swede.
He was a Swede. And my dad said, well, if you would be willing to cut wood or chop wood for the stove and pump water for the cows, you can stay here for your board and room. And so he stayed all winter long.
The church was an obvious place to meet people, people who spoke your language. There were often many connections of histories, depending on where you immigrated from. If you were from Värmland or Småland or a particular community. And some of these patterns of migration meant that a lot of people ended up coming from certain areas and settling in certain areas. So I think the church was a fairly lively place, as were many of the lodges. And it was where you might find employment. It's where you may make friendships. It might be where you find love and your future spouse.
Here is where the Swedes went to meet other Swedes. And there's where my grandfather met my grandmother in the Covenant Church. And they were very, I mean, it was a wonderful place that they could meet. And that was a beautiful brick church already with stained glass windows, and it was big.
And our story is similar to Augustana and the Free Church and the Swedish Baptist Church, but we are sister church to Missionsförbundet in Sweden. They were formed in 78 and we were formed in 85. And when the immigrants came to America, we know that they came largely for economic reasons, but with that economic concern, they brought this religious hunger.
The church also became important for younger families with lots of children as a place to remain connected to the culture out of which they came. Most churches in time formed Saturday morning programs, like often called Swede schools. So these children whose language is English, and this was true in my family as well. My parents said their parents never spoke Swedish to them. They learned Swedish by being in the community and being with immigrants and going to church, because church was in Swedish and was one of the last institutions to struggle with the language transition. But their parents wanted them to learn English, so they spoke it at home. And then they would go to Swede school and study Swedish on Saturday morning so that they would not forget the language of their own culture.
I always thought that, you know, God was an old man. So if you were going to pray, you really should use Swedish, because, you know, the old people on the east side, this was a Swedish community, and the old people would stand on the avenue speaking Swedish away, and because they often hadn't learned English. And so I thought that, you know, whenever you pray, you should pray Swedish, because our service in church was Swedish. Everything that had connected with God was Swedish. My mother said we should ask God's blessing on members of the family. I would try to make their names Swedish. So I would say, Gud välsigna mamma och pappa och Vivian och Gordon. Because I was trying to think that God had to understand Swedish. He was so old, he wouldn't understand me. So I tried to make the names of my family sound Swedish to God.
Gustav Johnson was the preacher here, and Skogsberg had built this temple and put pillars in it, and they asked what the pillars were for. He said, that's for timid sinners to hide behind. And one day Gustav was preaching, Adam, where are you? And Liedman was in the audience, and his name was Adam, and he peeked out and he said, here I am. My father wrote a family biography for us of his life. He discovered, by the way, when he went back to Sweden in 1956, when he sent for his birth certificate, that he was the illegitimate child of his older sister. And he never knew it until he was 60 years old and dean of the seminary. Went through him like a shot. And he came to my brother and I the next day and said, does it matter to you that I'm adopted? And I said, Dad, if anything, it fills me with wonder that God would take a little waif like you and make you who he's made you.
This is what I got from the Salvation Army 2 years ago. This is the greatest reward that can be given to any Salvation Army officer in America. Så jag är lite stolt över det.
Ja, man får vara lite stolt.
Så tänk att smålänning som gick och körde oxar en gång i tiden fick ränna.
Ja, just det.
Ja.